Afternoon, guys. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School. What I wanted to do real quick is just give you a segment from my latest Udemy course that I'm working on called Basic Survival. And it's a course that's going to teach you pretty much everything we teach here at the basic class in Ohio, minus the hands-on, minus the no, you're not doing that right, do it like this. But the information will be virtually the same in the end. And one of the things that we teach out here is a shelter that really was perfected, I think, in as far as a recreational shelter by my buddy Scotty Kinder, who's an instructor out here at the school. He uses this shelter quite a bit in conjunction with a canvas sleeve for the bed and a large 8x8 oilcloth tarp by Tent Smiths. But I've adapted this design, which is not a new design by any means, to fit the emergency kit that we recommend people carry at the Pathfinder School. So you have two 6mm drum liners and you have one grabber emergency space blanket. That creates this shelter. So you have two tripods that are lashed together and a couple pieces of emergency kit and you're ready to rock and roll. Now, again, this is an emergency shelter. If you've got all of your kit, you may still want to set this up because maybe it's raining and you want to get off the ground and you have no way to do that. You didn't bring a hammock with you. You were planning on sleeping on the ground. You can set this up, get off the ground, put your sleeping bag in there, put your wool blanket in there, put your big tarp over the top of it that you brought with you if you want to. Or maybe you got wet and now you need to dry out and you need to get warm. You can still use all of those same things, but you can combine this space blanket in there to create more of a convective warming from a fire that you have in front of it. So even though it's an emergency type shelter, it's a very good shelter to understand that you can use in conjunction with the modern gear that you have, or the normal gear that you have, I should say, or you can use it with your more traditional gear like my buddy Scotty Kinder does. So I wanted to give him a shout out real quick, and now we'll get on with the segment. Okay, the sheltering phase is where we're going to start putting together a lot of the skills that we've talked to up to this point. We're going to be practicing our knot and craft, our lashings, putting together and being able to manipulate those heat loss factors that are going to enable us to create a microclimate so that we can control our body's core temperature using the items within our kit. This setup here that I'm going to walk you around in just a minute and talk about is a very simple setup that's not real labor intensive if you've got a good saw. You're going to have to cut your poles, but then you have two tripod lashings, and pretty much that's all the work you have in this shelter other than putting it together and staking things out. We'll talk about that as we walk through the shelter. But what we've got here is we've got both of our 6mm drum liners on the bottom of this shelter. I'm going to go ahead and pull the stake out of the ground, which is just held by a Marline spike hitch. Really, really simple to get undone and take out of the ground. We've carved two wooden stakes. I'm going to drop this back for a minute so that you can kind of see a little better this bed scenario. So we've just taken two logs and we've friction fit them on the tripod legs. I'm going to position this camera a little bit better so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. But all we've done is we've cut the bottom out of both of these garbage bags, overlap them on these two logs, and then drop these logs friction fit right down onto this tripod. There's no tying involved in that. The only tying that's done is the tripod lashes and then one cross pole over the top just sitting there to put our tarp over. And you've got a pretty decent bedding situation here that should easily enough hold up to, I weigh 220, so it'll hold 220 pounds. And it's a pretty good, comfortable bed to lay in. Now, you're laying on plastic here, so you're probably going to want to put your wool blanket in there if you're carrying your proper kit and you've got that wool blanket. You could put that on there. If you had a sleeping bag because you had your normal camp gear and it was an emergency and you were setting this shelter up, you could obviously put your sleeping bag on top of this as well. But it gives you something that's off the ground, so you're not having to worry about anything that's creeping and crawling around the ground, moisture that may be in the ground, conductivity from the ground. The only thing you have to worry about with this is convection. And in a cold weather scenario, you'd want to set this tarp up to manipulate that convection, put a long fire out here in front of the shelter, one step from the ridge line, and then put some type of backer on that fire if you can, so that that convective radiant heat rises up through the shelter, and you can change the position of that tarp on the back side to be lower to the ground and attach it to these tripods so that it reflects heat up and around inside the shelter. In fairer weather, you can set it up the way we have it now, so that the tarp is just covering the shelter to give you a covering at night. It's going to trap a little bit of body heat, but you're going to get some convection through there. But that's not a big deal as long as it's not really cold outside. And you can always have a fire out here, no matter what, to trap some radiant heat inside the shelter. So it's a really, really quick and dirty shelter system, but it gets you up off the ground. It's more complicated than the other shelters that we talked about. But again, if you've got just a few extra skill levels, being able to tie, lash, and bind, you can build a structure like this very quickly. This is about a 30-minute shelter build at the outside. Okay, so all we've done on this shelter is we've measured out our distance to about the width of our space blanket. We've got a 7-foot space blanket here in length, 5 foot in width, the normal one that we carry in our kit. And I've just tied it with a square knot or a reef knot right to the bottom rung on both sides, and then flipped it over the ridge line here. And at the moment I just got it wrapped around this other side, but this is where you would pull it out and stake it. You could also put poles there and stake it out higher if you wanted some type of an overhang, especially if you had a fire in front of it and you had fair weather. That would help you trap a little bit more heat on the inside. The other good thing about this shelter is because you've made it with these trash bags, you have a tube here. That tube can then be stuffed with insulation like leaves or grasses to help battle any convection problems that you may have. So this is a very, very simplistic shelter that doesn't take very long to build and doesn't take a lot of material other than what you have in your emergency kit already. All we did to stake this out was we took 2 longer lines here and made a bank line that I just wrapped around this bottom rung a couple times. And again, what we talk about with our knots and lashings, all we did was come out on this cord a little ways, put a marlin spike hitch in here, pull it taut, and stake it in at whatever distance we want to use to get that shelter out a little ways away so we can crawl inside of it easy enough when we're ready. Again, we could stake this further out with a couple of poles easy enough and have it up like this in the air if we wanted to. And you can choose whatever setup you want that's conducive to the situation and the weather. That's the good thing about this shelter. It's highly flexible as far as what you can do with it and how you can manipulate it. You could also drop that space blanket over and down on the backside, tie it to the bottom rungs instead of to the cross rung. Then you would have heat that you could trap from underneath and bring up in a cold weather scenario as well, and still fill the bags with insulation if you chose to. Guys, I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.